midday sun scorched down on Burnt Creek. The town's main road was thick with red dust, and there, right in the middle, unfolded a scene that made everyone hold their breath. A tall, powerfully built Apache woman had her hands tied behind her back and was being dragged behind a horse-drawn wagon. Each jolt tore more of her skin, leaving streaks of blood in the dirt. Her face was sunburned, her black eyes wide open. She made no sound, only ragged breathing, and a gaze that refused to surrender. People stood on both sides of the street, some laughing, a few children throwing rocks. The man driving the wagon bellowed with laughter. "Let these savages know who's in charge around here." His laughter was cut short by a sharp gunshot. The wagon jerked to a stop. The horse neighed in panic. From the far end of the street, Silas Carrion stepped into view, a lone rancher, hardened by the Sunday. The light glinted off his weathered face, and his steel-gray eyes were ice-cold. He walked forward slowly, raising his Colt, voice low and thunderous. "Let her go." The driver sneered. "This ain't your business, Carrion." Silas said nothing. A second shot rang out, shattering one of the wagon wheels. Silence swept through the crowd. He stepped up, pulled a knife, and cut the rope, binding the woman. Then he knelt beside her. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Blood seeped from open wounds. Her chest rose and fell with effort. Silas placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his eyes burning with restrained fury. "I have seen enough. No one gets to drag a human being this low." No one answered. The desert wind swept through the town, lifting red dust into the air, shrouding her body like a funeral veil. Silas lifted her into his arms and walked away from the street, leaving behind a town bowed under the weight of a justice it had long forgotten. Blood from her back soaked through the front of his shirt. The horse trudged across the sun-scorched field, leaving behind the town of Burnt Creek and a trail of silent stares. He said nothing. With each hoofbeat came a breath drawn tight between the heat and the wind stinging his face. When they reached the ranch, he laid her down on a rough wooden bed, cutting away the torn skin and dried blood. Her body looked like it had been carved from bronze broad shoulders, muscular arms, sun-darkened skin marked with old lash scars. But in those closed eyes, the breath of life still lingered. Silas lit a fire. The flames flickered across his face, as hard as stone. He cleaned her wounds with warm water, then bandaged them using strips torn from his own shirt. Each time he touched her, her body jerked from the pain, but not a single sound escaped her lips. 2 days passed. She did not wake. Cold sweat matted her hair, her lips cracked, and her breathing came in shallow bursts. He gave her water drop by drop, keeping her alive with the patience of a man who had seen death too many times. On the second night, the first snow of the season fell early, covering the wooden roof in white. Silas sat by the stove, his eyes sunken, staring into the fire as if speaking to the past. He remembered his late wife, the woman who had died during a bandit raid 2 years ago. Since then, he had lived like a shadow. But now, in front of him, was another soul, one just as tormented, just as stripped of dignity. At the break of dawn, she let out a faint moan. Her eyelids trembled, then opened slightly. A weak light caught in her deep black eyes, full of confusion and guarded fear. She looked around, then met his gaze. Silas sat still, his voice low and hoarse. "You are safe now." She struggled to breathe, whispering in a raspy voice. "Why did you not let me die?" Silas tilted his head slightly, answering simply, "Because death is not justice." Outside, the wind swept across the fields, scattering the ashes in the stove. In that small room, 2 strangers had just crossed paths, one who had saved a life, and one who had not yet dared believe in miracles. But between the cold earth and the warm fire, something had begun to stir back to life. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, weak sunlight slipped through the small window, casting long streaks of light across the wooden floor. The Apache woman opened her eyes. Her breathing was still heavy, but real. The ceiling was rough timber, the air thick with the scent of medicine, smoke, and horsehide unfamiliar, yet more peaceful than anywhere she had ever known. Silas was sitting near the stove, his gray eyes steady, his shirt dusted with ash. He saw her wake but said nothing. He simply poured some water and brought the wooden cup to the edge of the bed. She tilted her head, hesitating, but his calloused hand rested lightly, not forcing, only offering. "You have been asleep for 2 days," he said softly. "I did not need sleep," she replied, her voice hoarse and faint. "Your body did." She looked at him. His eyes were not like those of the white men who had beaten her. There was no contempt in them, only the weariness of someone who had lost too much. As the fire began to fade, she tried to sit up, but a sharp pain tore through her chest. Silas reached out to steady her, keeping her from falling. She clenched her teeth, gasping. "Do not touch me. If I do not, your wounds will tear open again," he answered. The silence between them was heavy as iron. He pulled a chair further away, sat down, and spoke in a low voice. "I am Silas Carrion. This is my ranch. You are not a prisoner here. When you are well, you are free to leave." She frowned, as if she did not believe him. "No one gives anything for free. I am not giving. I am returning what was taken from you, your right to choose." She said nothing for a long time, her eyes drifting toward the window where snowflakes began to fall. "Your people killed my family. My people once killed the woman I loved," he replied, voice steady, without hatred. She looked at him, her gaze burning like fire, but he did not look away. "And still you saved me? Because hatred is not a wise solution." She said no more. She only pulled the blanket up, turning her head slightly. In her tired breathing, she heard the soft crackle of firewood, the only sound between two people who had both lost everything. Outside, the fields were blanketed in white. Inside, in the cold of a small wooden house, the smallest spark of trust had begun to take root. The cold came early that year. Every morning, Silas and the Apache woman breathed into the white mist, their breath vanishing like smoke. Snow blanketed the barn roof and iced over the water trough. His small ranch echoed only with the wind and the occasional thud of a hammer, the sound of two people learning how to survive. Silas worked from dawn, building fences, gathering firewood, patching up the barn roof torn by the wind. And though she was not fully healed, she joined him outside. Every swing of her hammer was sharp, deliberate, powerful, muscles taut beneath her sun, bronze skin, touched with a thin line of golden light. He handed her an old pair of leather gloves. She took them, nodded silently. In the evening, they sat beside the fire, each with a bowl of thin soup. She rarely spoke, but sometimes she asked, "Are you not afraid the townsfolk might come looking?" Silas gave a dry laugh, his voice rough like desert wind. "If they want to fight, they know where to find me." Day by day, the snow grew thicker. They hauled water together, set rabbit traps, and sawed wood. When the wind rose, she would pull her cloak over his shoulders without a word. He looked at her sun-darkened hands, rough but steady hands that were once bound, now giving warmth. One evening, as the snowstorm howled around the house, Silas sat repairing a saddle. She stood nearby, firelight dancing on her strong face, her black eyes reflecting his shadow. "You are different from them," she said quietly. "How so? You do not look at me like I am an animal." Silas looked up, meeting her gaze deep, fierce, like a midnight ravine. "Because you are not." Outside, the wind roared, and snow battered the windows. In that small house, two survivors sat close, not just for warmth, but for something else, something harder to name. She stared into the flames and whispered in Apache. Silas did not understand the words, but he knew they were not words of bitterness. That night, for the first time since coming to the ranch, she slept deeply. Silas rose at midnight and stood by the window, watching the snow fall. He knew this winter would be a long one, but if they faced it together, maybe for the first time in years he would not have to live alone. "I am truly grateful to have you here. If this story brings back memories of old days of dusty afternoons and hoofbeats echoing in your heart, consider subscribing to my channel, so that every day we can sit together once more, and I will tell you another tale of the West." That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the door. The cabin glowed faintly with the last embers of the fire, casting shadows on the walls, shadows that revealed every crack, every scar across the skin of the Apache woman. She sat still, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, exposing old burns, faded lash marks, and the web of scars running down her arm. Silas saw them, but he did not ask. He knew some stories should only be heard when someone is ready to tell them. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice low and rough. They took me at the Verd River, killed my brother, tied me up, dragged me like an animal. Her eyes did not meet his. They stared into the fire. I thought if I stayed quiet, they would stop, but they did not. They laughed and kept breaking me until I forgot who I was. She clutched the edge of the blanket, her voice trembling. I do not want pity. I just want to remember that I was once a warrior. Silas sat there, his hand gripping the edge of the chair. Her words cut like a blade, and he felt his throat tighten. He poured her a drink, offering it, but she shook her head. Liquor just makes you forget. I do not want to forget anymore. The fire flared, casting a glow across her face, strong, scarred, beautiful like a cracked bronze statue. He spoke softly, his voice deep and hoarse. They may have taken your body, but they never killed your will. You are still alive. That, in itself, is a victory. She looked at him not with suspicion, for the first time, but with something else. A flicker of trust. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "And you? Why do you live alone out here?" Silas lowered his head. "Because I lost the woman I loved. Lost her to men like me and hatred like yours." Outside, the wind screamed, and snow blanketed the windows like ash. Inside the cabin, two souls sat in silence, sharing pain without needing tears. At last, she said, "Hate kills all of us, does it not?" "It does," Silas replied, his eyes gazing far beyond the window. "But kindness can save us. And sometimes, one person is enough." That night, they sat until the fire died down, the final flickers of light dancing across two faces, two people who had once lost themselves, now finding in each other a fragile belief that humanity was still worth saving. That morning, the clouds hung low, and a cold wind blew down from the northern hills. Silas was outside, sawing wood, when he heard the sound of hooves in the distance, slow, heavy, and getting closer by the second. He stopped. His horse tugged at the reins and gave a soft whinny, as if sensing something was wrong. 5 men on horseback emerged through the red dust. Leading them was Jeb Torin, the biggest cattle rancher in the region, a man who once referred to Apache people as game with no season. He stopped at the gate, squinting when he saw Silas. "Heard you got yourself a squaw in that house, carrion." Silas wiped his hands on his pants, his eyes calm and steady. "I saved a person, not hiding anyone. Call it what you want. Folks in Burnt Creek say you've shamed the whole town. Some of the boys just want to teach her a lesson. My advice, stand aside." Silas looked him dead in the eye. "You take one more step, and I'll teach you a lesson." Jeb chuckled, but it was a dry, hollow sound. He motioned with his hand. 2 men dismounted, pulling ropes from their saddles. The cabin door creaked open. The Apache woman stepped out. No cloak, only a simple cloth draped over her shoulders. Her long black hair flew in the wind, and her deep, dark eyes held no fear. Scars shimmered on her shoulder in the cold morning light. "If they want me," she said softly. Her voice as heavy as iron, "I will go." Silas stepped forward, placing himself between her and the men. "No, no one touches you. Not while I'm still standing." For a moment, silence fell like a heavy blanket. Then one of the men reached for his gun. A sharp click, but Silas was faster. A flash of metal, a gunshot cracking the wind. The man dropped, his weapon flying from his hand. Jeb tightened the reins, his face gone pale. "You'll die for this, carrion." Silas did not move. His voice was low and gravelly. "I died a long time ago, Jeb. Now I live just to make sure no one else gets dragged down the street like an animal." No one said a word. The wind howled across the fields. Snowflakes drifted down, covering the lifeless body in a thin white veil. Jeb gave a sharp tug on the reins. The men turned and rode off, leaving only dust and silence behind. As the air cleared, Silas lowered his gun and turned around. The Apache woman stood there, her eyes bright not with fear, but with something else. Awe. Gratitude. "You risked your life for me," she whispered. "No," he said, voice rough, "for what is right." The wind swept ashes from the hearth out onto the porch, and there, In the middle of blood and snow, two people stood quietly together, not as savior and saved, but as two souls who had both chosen to stand on the side of humanity. 3 weeks after the standoff, the snow on the fields began to melt. Water trickled from the frozen gullies into the stream, making a soft sound like the earth letting out a long sigh. No one from Burnt Creek came anymore. The whole land was quiet, filled only with the wind and the steady rhythm of Silas's hammer. Blending into the breath of life slowly returning, the Apache woman, now fully healed, stood on the porch, the early sunlight glowing on her bronze-toned skin. She helped Silas repair the stable, haul wood, and rebuild the damaged fence. Every strike of her hammer was strong and certain, her muscles moving in rhythm beneath the leather shirt. The wind played through her long black hair, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. She was no longer the one who had been dragged through the dirt, but a part of this land now. By evening, they sat on the porch together, sipping weak coffee. In the distance, the red glow of sunset stretched across the fields. "Tomorrow I will plant more corn," she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You are staying?" Silas asked, his voice quiet, though hope was buried in the question. She smiled, the first smile he had seen from her since the day they met. "Do you think I have anywhere else to go?" The answer struck something in his chest, a soft ache that warmed instead of hurt. He turned away, watching dust float in the fading sunlight like golden ash. That night, they built a fire together. She made rabbit stew, and the rich aroma filled the cabin. As he ate, she sat silently across from him, then finally spoke. "I used to think freedom meant not being chained, but now I know. Freedom is having someone believe you deserve to live." Silas looked up. "I believed in you from the first day." She nodded gently, her gaze softening. When night fell, they stepped outside onto the porch. The sky was filled with stars, and moonlight poured over the dew-damp grass. She sat beside him, her hand brushing against his rough, calloused, but warm. There was no confession, no grand gesture, only breath, mingling with the wind. Silas said softly, "This season, the corn will grow fast, and so will people," she replied. They both laughed, rare, real. In the pale moonlight, their small cabin glowed like a lantern in the vast prairie. There, a woman who had once been dragged through the dirt, and a man who had once lived like a ghost, were sowing the seeds of a spring called freedom, the first season in their lives that truly belonged to them both. That summer came late, carried by winds, scented with scorched grass and fresh earth. In the fields before the Carrion Ranch, rows of green corn stood waist-high, swaying gently like blessings from the land and sky. Life had changed. No more gunfire, no more enemy hoofbeats, only the quiet breath of a home that had come back to life in a place once left for dead. In the late afternoon, Silas led his horse up the hill behind the ranch to where his late wife lay at rest. In his hand, he held a tarnished silver bracelet, Clara's last keepsake. He knelt, rough hands digging a small hole beside the weathered wooden marker. The bracelet caught the sunset, flashing like a tear in the fading light. "Thank you, Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling in the breeze. "You taught me how to love. And she taught me how to live." He buried the bracelet beneath dry grass, the wind carrying the rustle of leaves like a final goodbye. When he stood, his gray eyes shimmered in the dying light, and for the first time in years, the old pain felt truly laid to rest. Back at the cabin, the glow of a lantern spilled out the window. Inside, the Apache woman, now his wife, was laughing, her hand resting gently on her round belly. Her long black hair shimmered in the warm light. She called out to him, "Silas, our baby is kicking like crazy." He smiled, stepped in, and placed his hand over her belly. Beneath warm skin, life stirred something he had never thought he would feel again. "Boy or girl, I do not care," he said softly, "as long as it carries a heart that knows how to care." She looked up, her dark eyes deep as the prairie night, and whispered, "It will be just like you." Time passed, and when the harvest came, so did the child. Warm bronze skin, gray eyes like his father's, black hair like his mother's. That day, Silas held his newborn on the doorstep, where the wind swept across the plains, and the red mountains glowed in the setting Sunday. "This world is cruel, my son," he said, his voice rough with truth. "But as long as you can reach out your hand and pull someone from the dark, you will have lived better than all those who only shout about justice." That night, he sat on the porch, leaning against the wooden beam, listening to his wife singing a lullaby in Apache. Her voice was low and aching, like the voice of the land itself. Above them, stars shimmered, watching over a soul that had once been lost. Silas smiled faintly. His voice, slow and quiet as the wind across the field, rose one last time. "They say the West was built on blood and vengeance. But I have seen love rise from ashes. I have seen a woman who was once dragged through the dirt, now stand beside me strong as a mountain. And because of her, I know now that justice does not always come from a gun, but from a hand that chooses to save a soul." The night wind whispered across the little ranch. Inside the glowing house, a baby cried, not a cry of pain, but the beginning of a new generation, born from kindness and freedom. And dear friend, true love does not grow from easy things. It rises from the ashes of loss and pain. In this wild land of wind and blood, they found freedom in each other's hearts, a place without chains, without hate. Only the faith that no matter how broken a person may be, they can still love, still live, and still rise again, like green grass after the storm. From the bottom of my heart, I truly wish you peace and happiness, wherever you are. I love you all, the cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. Tell me what you felt about this story. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if this story touched you. And do not forget to subscribe so we can meet again for another gripping tale of the Wild West.